Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. So, friends, it's our last day of the retreat, and for many of you, you've been spending the last 2 days or so working with your minds, trying to overcome whatever hindrances that you still have, and for cultivating mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And I want to talk about the 3 levels of defilements, because basically it's you could say the impurities or defilements in the mind that keep us from our fullest potential and to keep our mind trapped in the cyclic revolving around the cycle of repeated thought, speech, and actions that keep our mind and our life limited and keep it bound up in so many levels of stress, worry, fear, anxiety, and that basically, dominate most people's lives. And this corresponds with the 3 levels of suffering, and that level of the manifestation. So we have the defilements. The root of all defilements basically are ignorance, greed, and hatred. Those are called the 3 roots, the 3 unwholesome roots. And ignorance basically is the king, and that dominates all of our actions. That means, and ignorance is not knowing the truth. And because of that, we've allowed the mind to become too dependent on external sensory gratification and desires, and basically greed, and that greed for sensory satisfaction. And hatred arises because of the greed. Whenever somebody blocks our desire, then we become, angry. We develop, hatred for people that are blocking the objects of our desire, whether it's physical desire or mental desire or even our self-image, So what is called the level of manifestation is our reactions to phenomena. And so these accumulated levels of greed, hatred, and delusion, they manifest in our actions of body, speech, or mind, and basically our karmic actions. So it means we have an impulse. Let's say we have an impulse, somebody does something to irritate us. And so that arises as a thought and anger and some angry thoughts. And that leads to a decision, maybe to do something about it, to harm that person, whether it's physically or it's verbally, or even if it's mentally, sending out thoughts of ill will or hatred towards them. But especially in terms of breaking the precepts. It's those impulses that lead us to directly breaking the precepts, like the 5 precepts, killing or physically harming or abusing somebody, or the stealing, taking things to harm them, or just stealing in general, taking what is not given, or the sexual misconduct, hurting people through that aggressive sexual craving and so on. And then, of course, the various forms of negative speech, lying, slandering, rough, harsh speech. And then, of course, intoxicating the mind. And people take to intoxicants because they're trying to cover over or hide over some type of incompleteness in them, or some type of anxiety, and the only way they know how to overcome that is by taking some kind of intoxicating substance. But then that causes them to lose their heedfulness and to go out and do something foolish to themselves or others also. Anyway, so this level of the manifestation of the defilements manifests as our actual karmic actions. And so, actually, the Noble Eightfold Path is divided into Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And so the practice of Sila is the practice of putting brakes on the manifestation of the defilements. That means we take the precept to avoid from harming or killing some living beings, creatures, people or even animals. But so we may have the desire to, let's say, kill a mosquito, but because of the precept, we may have that urge and lifting up the hand, but at the end, because we took the precept, we kind of force ourselves not to do it. Or the same way as, maybe you want to take something that's not given, but at the last moment, mindfulness comes up and you check yourself and say, well, that's not skillful. And, you just kind of force yourself not to take it. But you might still have wanted to, but fortunately your mindfulness and wisdom came into play that, helped you to refrain from that. In the same way with the other potential for breaking the precepts. Because once you've done some unskillful behavior, you can't take the effect of that back. And it goes out into the world and intermingles with other beings and other energies to come back and causes problems multiple times over long periods of time. So that the level of the manifestation of the defilements in terms of the actual karmic actions, that is, the function of Sila is to minimize the impact of those gross type of karmic actions of body, speech, and mind. Of course, it takes mindfulness in order to restrain that. So, but at least to refrain from those gross karmic actions goes a long way for minimizing the types of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear that will plague a person if they are, caught up in these types of unskillful behavior. Because it's easier to control the actual physical actions of our body than to control the mind. But the actual physical actions of the body have a heavier consequence, or a more immediate consequence in our daily lives if we do some of this unskillful behaviors. So that's why the practice of Sila, or observing the precepts, is very important in the practice of minimizing the pain and conflicts that come to us on account of that. As we all know, just the practice of Sila can only goes a long way, but it's not enough. We practice Sila that prevents those overt types of speech and actions, but the motivations in the mind are still there. And so, like when you're meditating and then all of a sudden, a thought or an urge comes into the mind. So that's called the arising. When a thought or an urge initially arises in the mind. And then you have to contemplate it, using your skill, your mindfulness and wisdom, to always question, is what I'm about to do, is it going to be beneficial for myself and others? Or is it going to be painful and unbeneficial for myself and others? And that's where it's important to have the right understanding to make the decision, and the mindfulness to apply the right effort, to abandon the unwholesome intention and replace it with the wholesome intention. So anyway, that level of arising is where those initial thoughts come up from. Any thought of delusion, thought of greed, thought of anger or hatred. And that's where the samadhi, or the practice of meditation, plays its important part. Because as long as there's still the intentions arising in the mind, there's the potential for losing one's mindfulness and then allowing that to then actually, let's say, break one of the precepts or to do some unskillful thoughts or actions. And so that's the important aspect about the practice of samadhi, is calming the mind. So in the meditation, when you develop a concentration, whether it's through anapanasati or whether it's through mindfulness of the body or any other number of mental calming techniques, the mind reaches a state of tranquility where then even those thoughts don't arise. And you've all had moments of that tranquility where, you were kind of perfectly content with the present moment and not wanting to do anything. But that's usually short-lived for most people. But, you can come to that experience where even the desire to break any of the precepts wouldn't enter your mind. So that's, reaching that level of the arising of the defilement is accomplished through the practice of the samadhi, or gaining concentration. But it includes mindfulness too. When people use the word samadhi, of course, most people understand it as just concentration. But when it's used in the term of with Sila Samadhi and Panya, that samadhi includes also mindfulness and concentration, mindfulness, and as well the right effort. But even though we might attain tranquility, so reaching a tranquility where even the thought or urge to break a precept or some unskillful behavior wouldn't arise, so therefore, certainly then you're not going to actually do the overt actions based on that. But then there's the level called the anusaya, or latent tendencies, where the defilements are lurking down in the unconscious mind. They might not have arisen and manifested, but they're like sleeping in the unconscious mind, just waiting for the opportunity to come out. So when you lose the samadhi, when you come out of the meditation or the tranquility, then those latent tendencies that are still there, then they can become agitated, like stirring up a hornet's nest, right? You might have a wasp or hornet's nest, and they may be peacefully inside, but when you go close to it or put a stick in there, then they all come out. So that's what happens with our unconscious tendencies that are still there. We might, prevent them from manifesting as our physical actions or even coming up in the mind through practicing meditation, but they're still there deeper inside. And that is where the level of wisdom and the deep insights that come through our meditation practice plays the important part. But it's only through the deep insights into impermanence, suffering, and no self that actually destroy those roots of the defilements. Again, I'm talking about the three roots of ignorance, greed, and hatred. But ignorance is really what we are interested in overcoming, in the cultivation of wisdom. Wisdom is the antidote for ignorance. And ignorance is basically not understanding the truth. Thinking that, believing things are permanent, believing that we're the owner and controller of doing things. So the antidote is the perception of impermanence and the perception of no self, and understanding the profound depth of suffering too. Because a lot of people like to deny that. And so many people are in denial of their own mind and so on, because they don't want to directly look at it. But in the practice of Dhamma, it takes a lot of courage to really look into one's self and to acknowledge these levels of sort of defilements. Because they will continue to plague us over and over and over again if we just ignore them and let them continue to, sort of dominate so much of our thoughts, speech, and actions. So we remain in that kind of a mental prison to that. So those latent tendencies in the mind are only overcome through the 4 stages of enlightenment, or the 4 stages of purification. Which is, I'm not going to go into it too much because it's a pretty detailed subject for right now, but it's in those stages of insight where you gain an insight into emptiness and no self that destroys those latent tendencies for the mind. It's like you have a big building, a skyscraper, and you have a good foundation, and then maybe some terrorists put a bomb under the one corner of it and weaken that foundation. And maybe the building doesn't collapse, but it kind of weakens the building. So in the same way, those profound insights that we get in meditation, especially the insights into emptiness and no self and impermanence, it weakens the infrastructure of ignorance, which is basically also the ego. And that in turn then affects the arising of the defilements and also of the manifestation of those particular actions or speech. And in the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, I mentioned this before, the Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the way to live, think, and meditate that brings suffering to an end. And it starts with ignorance, the Noble Eightfold Path starts with right understanding, and right thought, the right speech, right action, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right effort, mindfulness and concentration. But there's 3 of those that are particularly of importance. And I've mentioned this before, and some of you, it's one of Bhante Ji's, what he calls the 3 pillars of the Eightfold Path, are the most important for our daily practice in the ways that we're helping to affect all those 3 levels of the defilements. And so the right understanding is one of the most important ones. Although they're of equal importance, but the right understanding is, comes first in the Eightfold Path. But right understanding has 3 levels: the intellectual level, and the level of contemplation, where you're actually thinking about the things in a state of meditation, where the meaning becomes not just intellectual, but it becomes more intuitively clear, and then the actual profound and deep insights into emptiness and no self that actually fundamentally weaken the infrastructure of the ignorance. So right understanding, basically, right understanding understands what is right according to Dhamma, not according to worldly views and so on necessarily, but according to Dhamma. And it understands what is wrong according to Dhamma. That means in terms of what brings suffering and what brings happiness. So in the Dhamma language, whenever we say something is wrong, that means it leads to problems and suffering. When we say something is right, it leads to less problems and less suffering and happiness. So not necessarily right and wrong based in the worldly kind of ideas, although some of that is also there. And then, so right understanding, and then right mindfulness, and right effort. So right understanding, right mindfulness, and right effort, those are the three sort of pillars of the Eightfold Path. So when a wrong intention arises, like the intention to want to, kill something, we have to be mindful of that. The mindfulness kind of isolates that intention and says, this intention has arisen. And then right understanding understands this intention to kill is wrong. Or if it's, the intention to give generosity, the intention to give dana or to help an old lady cross the street out of kindness, then, that's a right intention. And the intention based on kindness, compassion, and so on. And then the right effort to actually to do it, or the effort to let go or refrain from that unwholesome action, and if necessary to replace it with the wholesome action. So, if there's intention to tell a lie, then right effort would say that's a wrong intention. And then the right effort to actually tell the truth. Or if you're going to steal something, instead of stealing, give something. Or if you're going to, the intention to get angry and say some bad words to somebody, the effort to try to say some more kind or polite words. So, that's how those three aspects of the Eightfold Path have to be applied to all the other steps of the Eightfold Path. So usually our right understanding has to already be there in terms of our intellectual understanding or our understanding that we get through meditation. And then mindfully we are aware of our intentions that arise. And then that right understanding understands it. You don't have to wait and go and get your book out and say, wait a minute, is that a right one or a wrong one? Because you don't have time. The defilements, all three of those phases go in a fraction of a second. The latent tendency arises in the mind, and the decision to do some action. And so, the practice that we do in meditation, in our formal meditation or going on retreats, is like a training ground. And we practice these things in meditation. A lot of people just think, you just concentrate the mind and enter some state of quietness and, that's meditation. Well, that's a very small aspect of meditation, maybe not the most important. are not the most important, actually, because it's very superficial. But it's that training ourselves in cultivating the right understanding, the right mindfulness, and the right effort. So even while you're meditating, if there's whenever the hindrances arise, for example, to apply that mindfulness to them, and understanding these hindrances, if you just don't do anything about it, they're just going to keep your mind going around in circles, forever. But instead of applying the right effort to try to overcome that hindrance so that the meditation can go deeper. Or your thoughts. So if the thought of anger and ill will arises, to apply the antidote of metta, for example. Or when pain arises, to apply the effort to try to relax around that pain and to observe it and not immediately kind of react to it, or try to create a tolerance for it, or as you observe the sensation, that pain may disappear. See, that's such a wonderful thing about meditation that most people, don't have any idea about. And part of the wonderful quality about contemplating impermanence, that everything changes. So whether you have a painful sensation arise, if you just have patience and learn to observe it objectively, relax around it, you'll see that it'll change and probably disappear within 5 or 10 or 15 seconds. Or maybe 30 seconds. Or maybe an hour. At Will's point, it sometimes change. But even if you can't, endure it for 1 hour, delaying the reaction even by 15 seconds each time goes a long way. And then, as you're observing and having patience, whether it's a patience to your own thought, even some unwholesome nagging thought in your mind, if you just have patience, and just keep the mind grounded on your breathing. Just let the thought will peter out as long as we don't feed it with our identification or justification or worrying. It'll kind of just peter out and vanish. And if we can do that over and over and over again, that's the way that gradually those thoughts will stop coming in the future. Because everything that arises in our mind is simply because of habits, old habits that we've been practicing, not only from this life, but even from previous lives, but certainly even in this life itself. Because we keep on feeding it with the identification of me and mine. So when you stop feeding them, just like the neighbor's dog that comes over, as long as you feed it, you're going to keep coming back every day, right? But when you stop feeding it, you say, this person's useless, and they'll go to somebody else's house, or at least stop coming. So that's the same way it works with our various levels of defilements. Now the big question comes, being at the end of the retreat, is how do we try to maintain our meditation practice in the daily life? Because in the retreat it's easy to follow the precepts. Everyone is doing that. There's no other kind of distractions. It's easy not to get distracted and watch, kind of silly shows or other types of entertainments, because there's none of that here. So it's fairly easy to remain calm and peaceful, at least on the surface, in the retreat. But when you go home, there's no one around to meditate with, and there's no one around to watch you get up in the morning. Our old lazy habits come back. So the big question is, how can we continue to keep our mindfulness up to snuff, so to speak, and to practice the Dhamma in the daily life? Because that's where you create the karma, is out there on the street, or in your relationships with your family, or your friends, or your neighbors, or the people you work with, and others. And during the retreat, it's easy to come to all the meditation sessions again, because you're part of a group, and if you don't show up, then the teacher's going to know you're not there, and then, you look like a wimp or something, and so you just kind of force yourself to come to the meditations, you force yourself to sit through that pain, and so on. But when you go home, there's not necessarily anyone to be watching you, so the old habits come. So usually this scenario happens during a retreat. Maybe this short retreat, of course, is very short, but people get rekindle their motivation to practice, rekindle their enthusiasm for wanting to try to meditate every day. And so you might already been planning out how to, I'm going to get up at 5:30 every morning, I'm going to do 20 minutes of yoga exercise, I'm going to sit for meditation 45 minutes, and you cultivate this kind of motivation. And then maybe for the first day or two, maybe you're able to do that, or to sit twice a day for 45 minutes. So for the first day or two, maybe you're able to do that. But then gradually, usually the evening meditation will drop away. Usually for people that meditate on a regular basis for a long time, they found that meditating twice a day is the sort of, you could say, optimum for a lay life schedule, for at least maintaining a level of concentration and awareness that will prevent them from making some serious mistakes, or from, overstepping some of the grosser type of precepts. Kind of a bare minimum, you might say. But when you go home, from a retreat, and the pressures of the everyday life and so on come. So usually the first thing to be given up is your evening meditation, because you're tired from working the whole day. So you make a justification. Well, I'm tired, and so I'll stay up and watch some late night movies. It's funny, even though people are tired, they can stay up and just do meaningless things, talk for hours on a telephone, or watch the reruns of the horror movies or whatever, but not to meditate. It's kind of weird. So, and then little by little that, the morning meditation might drop from 45 minutes to 30 minutes. And a few days later, 30-minute meditation might drop to 15 minutes. And then before you know it, you're finishing up your last bit of coffee in the morning, going out the door, and you pat the Buddha on the head, and you say, Namo Buddhaya! You meditate for me. And that's all your meditation. And that happens to a lot of people, because I've been teaching meditation for almost 40 years. And I've heard this story over and over and over again. Even I went through some of that too myself. So, but anyway, it's very common. So, what's a person to do? We have that motivation, but somehow it's those old habits are enough to derail what we want to do, or at least to minimize it. So anyway, because a lot of people think meditation it's all or nothing. You think, if I can't meditate an hour, it's not worth it. And so, they talk themselves into thinking they just skip it all together. But there's a practice called the M&M. Many of you have heard this many, many times, but because I always repeat it. But even though I've repeated it hundreds of times, I still ask people, do you practice it? Well, maybe once or twice a day, once a week. But really it's a practice. An M&M means a minute of meditation. So it's a specific practice that you train yourself to stop for 1 minute every hour during the day. And you just stop what you were doing, kind of freeze in your tracks, and bring the attention to the present moment, to the body. Feel your feet pressing the floor if you're standing, or if you were sitting, just to feel the buttocks. You come to ground zero. And you kind of break that momentum to the future. Drop whatever you were doing or thinking and just come to the body. And take a deep, slow breath. Try to take one of those 3-part breaths. That's why I kind of, teach people that kind of 3-part breathing, because it's really one of the most wonderful things you could do. Not only just in meditation, but just in your life in general. And it's one of the best ways to immediately come to the present moment, because it takes all of your effort to take a deep, slow breath. Taking 5 or 6 or more seconds to slowly breathe in, hold the air in the lungs for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, and slowly breathe out. It's so relaxing, and it takes all your effort to do it that your mind can't think about anything else. And so it just basically forgets about what you might have been doing just before, and you get so relaxed. If you can take 2 or 3 of those deep, slow breaths, it's already 1 minute. And you just come back and you touch base with the present moment, and basically relax. But the main thing is to break that neurotic push to the future. They should come up with an acronym for that. They have acronyms for everything else these days, right? Neurotic push to the future. That would be NPF. NPF, neurotic push to the future. But that's what most people have, like an invisible hand that's on their back, pushing faster, 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 faster. And they find themselves going through the day, just you finish one thing and immediately something else, and then something else. And hardly ever pausing. And that's why people get so stressed out. Because they think there's so many things they have to do. But that's when also we make mistakes. So learning to pause, and just for 1 minute, it's not a long time, really. And so you come back, and you just rest in the present moment. Whatever meditation understanding you have, you can bring that to bear, apply that. Or in that last hour, you can contemplate what was your mind holding on to in that last hour. Were you angry at somebody? Were you whatever else it was? Did you have some lust, or did you have whatever it might have been? And you can kind of then apply the antidote for that in terms of the opposite quality. If you're angry with somebody, instead of plotting to get revenge, send them metta. So like that, even in that 1 minute, a lot can be done in terms of, recentering ourselves, letting go of the negative thoughts, cultivating some more positive ones, or just simply, relaxing in the present moment. And then continue what you're doing. But if you can do that really every hour, then by the end of the day you've accumulated 10 or 12 minutes of, you could say, quality meditation. That means because, meditation isn't just absorbing your mind in some imagined, state, but it's just, coming back to the present moment and experiencing that the mind resting in the present moment. Because that plugs you into a new energy. So we waste our energy the whole day long running around doing things. Or even if we rest, the average person, they take a rest, they plop down into a chair, and then they either daydream or go to sleep. But that's not real rest from the meditative point of view. Resting means bringing the mind to rest in the present moment while staying awake, not going to sleep. Those are two different types of rest. Rest for the mind is resting in present moment awareness, because that's actually the fountain of life force. Present moment awareness is life force itself. So the body needs its rest, but a lot of people go on dreaming when they sleep. Their body might be resting a bit, but their mind goes on dreaming. That's not really a rest. But in meditation, you even let go of that stream of thoughts that give rise to even dreaming. But anyway, so by practicing those M&Ms, it helps you to be more mindful when other situations arise. And especially if you have a situation where you have to go and talk to somebody during the day. Maybe talk to your boss about some colleagues who are, trying to cheat you or whatever, or trying to take your job, or talk to your boss about it. Wherever there might be some tension, some possibility for some, differences of opinion, arguments, tension, prepare yourself. And do an M&M before going in. Stop, take a few deep breaths, prep yourself. Okay, whatever happens in there, let me not lose my cool, let me be mindful, let me not say any bad, words that I would regret later. And so hopefully when you go in there, maybe some tension arises, you'll have that mindfulness more quickly up to under your breath and relax, don't react. So that's really, the practice of the Dhamma is learning how to control one's reactions in surprising or sudden types of situations. Because that's usually when we kind of panic or overreact, when we hear different types of news or situations and so on. So this practice of the M&Ms, it's like raindrops. If you only do it once or twice, you're not going to have enough water to wash your hands with. But if you do enough of them, then that accumulative effect. And then when you do meditate later, you'll be able to more quickly get into a good meditation if you do a longer meditation in the evening, because you won't be so stressed out by the end of the day. So the M&Ms help to release stress hour by hour rather than accumulating it hour by hour, what the average person does. So the average person has to stop at the pub or the massage parlor to get their stress relieved. But we can do that, releasing it hour by hour by practicing the eminence. And there's many moments during the day when we can also practice that, not even a minute, but the space of just one breath, waiting in line for something to happen, rather than looking around. Just take one deep, slow breath, and just pause, feel the feet pressing the floor. Standing, breathing. May all beings be well and happy, free from suffering. Even if it's just for that short bit. And so there's many opportunities during the day that we can use to practice, the Dhamma. And so the M&Ms, of course, are not an excuse for meditating longer, but especially those who find themselves in that situation of not having a consistent meditation practice, then that is, I wouldn't even say second best, because even if you do practice twice a day, if you meditate in the morning for 45 minutes or an hour, usually by the time of 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, whatever effects you would have done at 6 o'clock in the morning would have probably worn off. And then in the evening, you meditate in the evening and help you sleep better. So, the M&Ms are basically a good supplement. They supplement the gaps between the meditation. So, that's why, I usually like to remind people of that, because it's really a very valuable practice. And but even though it should be simple to do, even people tend to forget or neglect that. But if you really train yourself to do that hour by hour, you'll find that's a very good way of keeping that mindfulness and understanding at your beck and call. It's kind of just hovering right behind your ear right there. When something happens, instantly that awareness is there to help help you to minimize any types of unwholesome types of reactions. And that's why putting pauses between your activities is really a very powerful practice. People think just sitting in meditation, that's the meditation. No. If you train yourself to put pauses between your various actions, that I think is even better. In terms of better or not better, relative, but equally or even sometimes better, because it's more frequent. So the mind works in repetitive frequency. So the more you repeat something, the more it becomes a habit. And so that's why even if it's for a very short time, like the space of just pausing for one deep, slow breath, or for 1 minute, you're doing it over and over and over again. It becomes easier to do it, and the effects, accumulate like that. So, I want to remind you of that when you go home, after the retreat, and really try to, incorporate some of these things into the daily life. Now, from yesterday, there was a question put in the bowl that I guess I hadn't seen or hadn't come to my attention, but so I may just, because it's also relevant to kind of what we were saying earlier. Would you say a few words on the perception of impermanence? Does understanding the experience of anicca help one grow in equanimity? Yes. The short answer is yes. But to say a few words on the perception of impermanence. Well, anicca sanya is the word in Pali for perception of impermanence. Anicca sanya. And it's the understanding that, of course, everything is impermanent. But impermanence has different levels. Now I could, unmindfully, knock something over because not being mindful, with the arm and knock over a glass off a table and it breaks. You can say, anicca, impermanent. Everything is subject to breaking and disappearing. Or, you go home and you found a thief robbed something in your house. Anicca, impermanent. You have something one moment, then next moment it's gone, or it's broken. So everything in our life, including our body, our health is impermanent. You can be healthy today, but tomorrow morning wake up with the flu or worse. And so that everything in the world, our body as well as the external objects that we have, are subject to change and disappearance by whatever it is, by theft, fire, disappearance, death, so many means. So that's what we call external impermanence, or the superficial idea of impermanence. But the real impermanence that the Buddha was implying in terms of anicca sanya refers to the impermanence of mental states, and the impermanence of the moments of consciousness that are continually coming and going through the senses. So the impermanence of hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. So you hear a sound like, you're meditating, all of a sudden somebody, burps, or, a bird flies in a window, boom. And, a sound arose and vanished. Okay. So that consciousness of hearing just arose and vanished. And then something else may take your attention. Maybe you hear a sound over on this side. A car going down the road over here. And then over here, a bird sound or some other sound. Then a little itch arises on your face. It lasts a second or two and it vanishes. Or you feel your pulse or your heartbeat or your in-breath arise and vanish. The out-breath arise and vanish. Or a smell, you're sitting there and an odor comes by, but it just arises, lasts a second or two, and vanishes. So it's this idea that the sensory impingements are continually arising and vanishing, and our reactions to them also are arising and vanishing. And so it's tuning into that. And so even if you have a pain, then you observe that even that pain is continually changing. It's not some static knot of pain. And so you observe it as just being many little smaller sensations that are constantly changing. So it's this idea of, observing and experiencing the process of continuous changes that is coming through our body as well as the mind. And if you grasp at them and try to slow down that impermanence or prevent it, then that's when stress and suffering and other problems arise. But to open up to that flow of impermanence, that's where the equanimity, yes, it leads to equanimity, because you know that, okay, it's going to change, just have patience, wait 5 seconds. Wait 10 seconds. That person will stop talking. And the person will shut off their lawnmower. Maybe you're meditating and somebody turns on their lawnmower and mowing their lawn, and you can see yourself getting upset. You say, "Oh, I want quiet." And finally, you get up from your meditation, you go to the window to shout to the guy, but just before you get to the window, he stops. The engine goes off. Okay. And you wasted how many minutes were you boiling over with this anger, and then decided to do something, and then it stopped already. So the idea that you have patience to endure, and 99% of the things will change, or at least diminish to the point where they wouldn't lead to such a kind of a overreaction. So yes, the perception of impermanence is that acknowledgement. But not only the acknowledgement, but the observation that these things will change. So even if your mind is full of thoughts and agitation, okay, just have patience. Okay, this is a knot of karma arising. Just have patience. Try to keep your attention feeling some other sensation, not to get sucked into the vortex of that worrying about it or whatever. And that thought will eventually just wear itself out and change into something else, or allow you to come back and get grounded. So yes, the perception of impermanence allows us to have that equanimity toward things. Usually we're in a hurry. That's why we get impatient. We have no patience because we're in a hurry. We have too many things to do. And that's what causes people to get angry and impatient, because it's driven by the ego, the me. I want to get it done. I want to finish this set so I can go out and play, or satisfy some other desire. But then that leads to the stress. So I think maybe that would be enough for this Dhamma talk. Does anybody have any last question that may be connected with what I was seeing? You have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Bhante, you mentioned the main causes of suffering, ignorance, hatred, and greed, and you also talk about the karmic links, that can be created from that. Yes, please correct me if I'm wrong. I heard a few years ago at the Vihara temple a discussion at the end of meditation. We very quickly we heard another person, a lady who was stealing our business, and we got very upset about it. But we didn't do anything, but it really upset me. And we mentioned that to Bhante, Panyaranza, and Robert. So they are very compassionate, but they saw me very upset. And at some point, they told me, they said, you need to stop being so upset, because you are going to create more karmic link. You are going to see her again in another life. And so I heard that, and so I say, what can I do with this? Like send her loving kindness, compassion, loving kindness. So that's what I trained myself to do. And over the years, things calmed down, and we haven't seen her, after that. But if you could please explain to me, when does the karmic link gets created when you are dealing with an emotion, and how can you stop the karmic links? Is it through compassion, loving kindness?
Well, I think I was addressing that when I was talking about applying the right understanding, right mindfulness, and right effort. So when you see these thoughts and you're sort of thinking this woman is stealing from you and then in getting angry about it, then you're putting this onto this person. Maybe it's true, but still the fact that you are creating this anger in your mind and labeling her as probably a thief, that you're not seeing her good qualities. Maybe she has good qualities also, but the bad qualities of people tend to dominate our mind, even though they, for many years some person might have been your best friend, and then they did one or two things, and now your mind is holding only those one or two things in your mind is negative, and forgot about all the good things that the person had done. So that does extend the karmic link by reinforcing these ideas. And so by practicing, instead of, have compassion for her defilements. Okay, this person has done that, but, it's their defilements that are doing it. We shouldn't say a person is doing it. It's the defilements that are doing things, not the person. The person is only the vehicle, maybe, the body, maybe the vehicle. The person is doing that. But if we see it as the person, then that generates because we get angry at people and things, right? Not necessarily just the thoughts. So it's like, the example of a person moves to some new place. And so the moving van comes into a new street, and the moving people, and the neighbors come out, and new neighbors are coming. And then there's maybe a special, a challenged individual. I know nowadays you have to be politically correct in your speech, but let's say a person who might do some strange thing, like some person that might come out and make some faces at you or do something else, and you think that they're angry with you. You're thinking this person is so-called normal, and they're doing this. So you think, he doesn't like me, or they're trying to get rid of me. So we might get upset about that. But then the other neighbors come over and say, this person, they're like that. It's they do that to everybody. Don't take offense. And then, you'll let go of that, because you realize, they're not really doing it to me. It's only a certain condition that they have that's causing them to do that. It's not them. If it was them as a person, then you have the anger to hatred. But when you try to see it as just defilements, then it helps to hopefully weaken that.
Bhante, at which point do we not create karmic link anymore? Because we can create bad karmic link, but we can create also good karmic link through compassion, loving kindness, but it is still a link, it is still a continuation.
Well, it's a better one than the negative link, though.
But it is still keeping us linked to someone, even in a good karma. So at which point do we...
That's when you cultivate equanimity. Yeah. And which, understands both the conditions. And so you no longer, go out of your way to necessarily do something good, but you refrain from doing the evil. That's the main thing. Or doing the negative one. So in refraining from doing the negative thing, even if we don't do something positive, we're doing something positive by not doing the negative. So if we just refrain from being negative to somebody, not necessarily going out of our way to shower them with, praise and this and that, the fact that we just stop bothering them is going to be enough, and they'll forget about you, and you can forget about them and go your separate ways. Or not, depending. So that's why actually the Brahma Viharas, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, are sort of like the positive practices, right? So we practice metta, loving kindness, to overcome hatred. We practice compassion to overcome cruelty. We practice mudita, or sympathetic joy, to overcome jealousy. And then once we've used those positive qualities to overcome the negatives, then we give up both of them and practice equanimity. And the mind is just resting in the present moment, and it no longer does something bad, and no longer has to do anything good, because that itself is good, the equanimity. Anyway, I think we'll bring our discussion to an end so we can have at least one last good meditation before the end. Okay? So you can slowly stand up, stretch your legs.